Okay, welcome to another episode of Insider Knowledge. This week we have Zoe Cunningham, who's the Head of Talent Acquisition at Informa. So welcome, Zoe. If you can introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm Zoe Cunnington. I'm the Head of TA at Informa and for two of our divisions. So we've got our head office function, which is sort of Group Global Support, and also one of our commercial divisions, Informa Tech. My role is a mix of doing a bit of exec search, still working on the odd role, but also working on the strategy for those two divisions and trying to do anything proactive to help engage talent, upskill managers, and also basically mitigate any issues for the team sort of moving forwards and trying to get ahead of it a little bit. So it's quite a varied role. We're a international matrix sort of federated model type business, so we've got our own nuances and complexities, but it's all good fun.
Brilliant. Well, I'll just go through your LinkedIn profile. You've got a very strong recruitment background. Obviously, you've worked agency side as well.
Yeah.
What have you found has been the differences of working for a recruitment agency now, sort of going in-house and heading up I would assume quite a big team?
Yeah. To be honest, I think you've got different motivations. I think it's probably the big thing. If I think about why I went in-house, a lot of it was the motivation around what you want to spend your time doing. And I think that agency is a really solid way to start. I mean, I started sort of in-house. I worked on blue-collar recruitment for a few years, doing sort of cleaners, security guards, and a bit of HR. Then went into agency side for 5. But it definitely gives you a strong foundation of first working pace. I think you learn to work quickly and smartly in agency because you want to maximise what you're doing. It's a good place to be able to make mistakes. I think there's certainly a lot more leeway in agency to, try different things with different clients, see what works, see what doesn't, and sort of start to really form an idea. But you do spend a lot of time on agency side, obviously working on client development and business development, which is something that really just disappears when you go in-house. I think naively, I thought that going in-house would mean I'd be less busy or would have less to do. And in fact, I think it's probably the other way. And I think it's because your priorities completely shift. So there's a lot more around candidate experience, but also on the stakeholder side, there's a lot more onus on building and sustaining those relationships, building your brand individually in-house to be the person who people trust, as well as externally. You are the face of the brand at that point. And of course, if there's someone particularly tricky you're working with or a tricky situation, you can't walk away, right? And I think that's a fundamental difference. In agency, you can get to a point where you're like, do you know what, I'm calling it, this isn't going to work. Whereas in-house, you have to do a lot more problem solving to be able to get to that. But I think it gives a really solid background. To be honest, a lot of our talent partners and talent execs in Informa are from agency backgrounds. I just do think it gives such a fundamental understanding of what recruitment is and what to do and what not to do. And then coming in-house, there's a little bit of tweaking and changing, and there's some work on soft skills and sort of listening a little bit more, I think, than maybe you have to at agency. But it definitely provided a core foundation. I think it was such a great experience.
Brilliant. It's also going through the Informa website. I think I posted quite a few things about branding, but you've got very good branding. So even if I was looking to join you, I think you've got a lot of good information on your website about what it's like to work for you. Do you think that's quite an important factor for most businesses, or most businesses should adopt?
100%. So that's really recent for us. So for a long time, it was we're a shareholder-owned business. So a lot of our external comms and our external face was very much for the shareholders as opposed to for talent. But it is fundamental now, when people are the apex of importance to both businesses and also for people going into businesses, seeing who works there, that how a company feels and what values it has, I think, are more important than ever. And even if you're a company that no one's ever heard of, if people can see that you value your people, then they'll engage in a conversation. What you find now is the transactional ways businesses have operated for a long time, and it's been a long time where actually it's the hirers, the employers that have been in control, whereas for the last probably 18 months now it's definitely not been that way. It's actually all about, what do we have to offer as a business, what do you as an employer have to offer, what values do you have, what makes it worth going there. You spend a third of your life at work, like you've got to want to work with some people that don't irritate the hell out of you and that have great values and that are working towards the same thing. So I think that's been it's been a massive turning point for us. We've always been a people-focused business, and when you work here, everyone, when we do our sort of temperature check surveys and things throughout the year, everyone will say the reason that they work here is because of the people. But we weren't communicating that successfully externally. And I could give you a call tomorrow and say, hey, come work at Informa, the people are amazing. You'd be like, well, of course they are. Like, of course you're going to say that. So it's finding different ways of communicating that, but that's absolutely of paramount importance when trying to bring talent in.
I know a lot of you've got quite a lot of schemes where you're sort of building communities and you're getting people together. And given the day of recording as World Mental Health Day, what do you think is quite important for an organisation to adopt to, I suppose, just to make everyone feel included? That's the main sort of aspect of it.
100%. I think we're definitely on our journey. So we've got a load of different colleague-run networks at Informa that are very much colleague-run and are drivers for change, but also for community and belonging. A big thing Informa's done for a long time that's been really important is we have mental health first aiders, and we try to foster as much of an open communication as we can. I think it's really difficult to get right for everyone, but we have a core focus on well-being and flexibility, and that includes discretionary leave and things like that for people who are struggling. And one thing that I think we did really well and incredibly well was when COVID hit, and obviously the sheer fear and concern and people all of a sudden being at home and really struggling. We operate in some regions that they're still under lockdowns now, and the business handled that really well, looking at a lot of things around colleague welfare. At the start of the year when Shanghai was completely locked down, we're sending out food parcels and everything like that. So they do a lot of work around it. It's so important that you value your employees' health, and that includes their mental health, because as soon as someone feels that they're looked after, they're more likely to be open at work, they're more likely to share their experience, and they're also more likely to offer up ideas. And there's this whole piece around psychological safety is just so important, because you're not getting the most out of your people if they're not in an environment they feel comfortable and safe in. And one thing, as I say, we're on that journey. When we obviously still get bits wrong, but a lot of the work we do is around talking about it more. Like, we have an internal platform called Portal, and we have some of our senior leaders sharing their mental health stories and things on there, and people being quite open and honest. And there's been a lot of focus this year around sharing those stories, enabling people to feel comfortable talking to their managers when they're struggling, and everything from whether that's mental health, whether that's disclosing things about physical health, because I think that's something that really concerns people when they're going through any health issues, and also things like women going through the menopause or anything that's going to affect your ability to be 100% at work. Being able to communicate, that's so important. And I'm just delighted that things like World Mental Health Day, Black History Month, and Pride Month are really widely recognised, spoken about, and continued throughout the year. And I think that's really important.
That's fantastic. I mean, I say, to make everyone feel included is so paramount in today's world, especially when so many people work from home, to sort of work remotely. Even I'm sitting here working in my bedroom, kind of thing, recording this podcast. But some people react to it differently, and other people feel they need to. Because I always feel there's quite a lot of the younger generation now. They don't have that office atmosphere, especially if they're working from home. I mean, do you find that at all at the moment, or?
Yeah, it's really difficult, because we very much work predominantly hybrid. We have a huge home working community, and we have a few real small handful of roles that are office based sort of support roles and things like that. My biggest concern for early talent is I remember looking back and thinking about how much I learned through just osmosis from just being in the office, overhearing conversations, seeing someone interact with someone else and seeing what went right, what didn't go right. And I think all of that's gone, as well as, to be honest, when I first moved to London, I knew no one. The only way I was going to make friends is at work, right? You're like, well, I'm going to be stuck with these bunch of people. Hopefully a few of us will get on. And it's really losing that. And I think there's definitely a thought and a feeling that, well, loads of people are working hybrid or remotely. I should be working hybrid or remotely. But actually, as a young person coming into work and learning how to navigate, and also just learning off the people who've been doing it for years, there is such value in being in the office. And that value has to pass on to their managers as well, for making sure that they've got that time, because it's incredibly isolating, especially for extroverted people.
Yeah.
Being at home a lot. There's some of us, don't get me wrong, I like having my focus days at home, having that downtime, and I definitely recharge through calm and quiet. I don't recharge through people, which is funny given the role I'm in, but I so get value from being in the office and speaking to people. And some of our more junior members in our team, we get together once a week and just spend 45 minutes talking about what we did that week, what didn't go so well, what we would have done differently, and just have that learning element that I've had to almost manufacture a little bit so they get that exposure, because we're just not in an office-based working environment anymore. And I think it's something companies need to be conscious of when they're offering full remote contracts to early talent, is do you have the support infrastructure and the time to give that person the best experience, because it takes longer.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen quite a few numerous LinkedIn articles all about it, about the sort of the remote working, and there's quite a few job advertisements going out there where they want people to come into the office, but then they're finding they can't attract that talent because no one wants to actually come in the office nowadays. So it's that sort of that's sort of disconnect, really. I think employers don't know what to offer, whether they should offer fully remote, hybrids, or a mix between sort of the both. Do you find that when you advertise roles or when you speak to candidates at all?
Yes and no. I think so. We've always been quite flexible. So the hybrid working's not a new thing to us. I think the fundamental is you have to sell the value of being in an office. And if you've got someone who's 10 years into their career, knows what they do like the back of the hand, isn't in a collaborative role, is in an individual contributor position, and they want to work remotely, as an organisation, you really need to ask yourself why you're forcing them to come in. What is the value of them being in the office? Because if it's we pay so much money for this office, we want it full 5 days a week, then that's not the right motivation. Yeah. Equally, there has to be a recognition for people who have collaborative roles or who spend a lot of their days in meetings, as I do. It's exhausting. There's a lot of studies about Zoom fatigue and things since the pandemic, and the fact that you have a little picture of yourself in the bottom corner of the screen, which I now always hide. And it's this fatigue that happens because, quite frankly, you don't spend that much of your life looking at yourself. It's a weird concept. People don't gesticulate the same. You can't read body language the same. And it's a lot more tiring. Actually, the value of going into the office and spending 1 or 2 days a week having face-to-face meetings is really valuable. The way we always position it, we will only demand the hybrid if it's really needed for that role, if it's an active collaborator role. We will always consider remote. We'll always take it on case by case, and we do have quite a lot of jobs that are full-time remote. But I think for us, it's about transparency from the off. It's also questioning why. It's so much of, in fact, one of my biggest things is it's always about the why. Any interaction, anything, it's about the why. Why do you need someone in 3 days a week as opposed to 2 days a week? Why, what's the value there? And if you're transparent and you have that, then I think actually those interactions aren't as difficult. I also think that start of the year, a lot of people like remote or nothing, whereas now people are like, God, I could just go in, and also knock it into your social life. Like, I go into London twice a week, and on those evenings I see some of my mates who don't live out this way who are in London, so you fix it in. And we did it before, you know, there's a certain amount of pre-COVID, we were quite happy doing it, and the only thing that's really changed is the fact that we worked full-time from home. And don't get me wrong, some people had a wonderful time that entire time, but there was definitely people who suffered from that and felt really isolated. So I think it's about transparency. I think it's about communicating what you need. If you're a candidate looking for work, communicating the why, and if you're an employer, communicating the why, because it's all about transparency.
Just getting across, like you say, personal branding, promoting yourself, why people come to you, but also the company. It's quite a lot of small businesses and startups that don't perhaps have the budget to spend on all these fancy websites or doing videos and things like that. They just don't know where to start. I suppose they've got to offer new benefits as well, especially if it's remote working. Is there anything you would recommend to a startup on how to go about their recruitment strategy? Maybe first things they should try where you've perhaps been more successful doing?
I think one thing we've massively changed this year, and one thing we rewrite our hiring manager training quite regularly, because the market changes quite regularly, right? So one of the big things we're focusing on now is starting off your job descriptions and job adverts with what's sexy about it, right? Why is someone going to come and apply for this job over something else, or want to work for this business? And a lot of it is now the positioning of businesses as a place to work. So instead of doing that, and don't get me wrong, job descriptions have to be dry. They are fundamentally what you're going to do in a role, but having that short paragraph or 2 or 3 sentences at the top that talks about your business and its purpose and its values, and also if it's a new role, why is it a new role? What's exciting about it, right? That's a growth role. That's great, especially in this climate at the moment. Growth roles, amazing. All of that is going to give trust in your business. I think startups right now are going to really struggle because as the economy starts to decline, people are like, well, I'd rather sit where I am, even if it's not perfect, because if we get laid off, I get a package and the company's big and it's stable and all this sort of stuff. And going to startups, always high risk, because depends how established they are. But actually, if you're really values driven, and that's what people seem to buy now, even when you look at more mature workforce and people who've been in work for a long time, COVID gave a lot of people a mental reset where they're like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And actually, if you've got great values and a great ethos as a business, if you lead with that, everything else can follow. As a startup, you can't offer generally the best benefits package or the best bonuses or anything like that. But what you probably can offer is a lot of flexibility. You can offer the positions for people to be in a grassroots environment where they're going to help shape something. It goes back to the why. It's about like, why would someone go work there? And I think it's that little bit at the start that just tells you the values and the purpose. And I think it's a lot about that now.
What do you think is probably the biggest challenge in recruitment right now, given what we've just talked about? Is there any sort of one specific point you would say that's it looks a bit gloomy?
I think there's been a huge salary inflation this year, and there's been a massive money fight, and it's started to drop off. And there's also been a lot of layoffs from some of the big tech companies, some of the smaller tech companies with quite a lot of staff. And so what you've found is you've got people with inflated salaries coming onto a market where the salaries are deflating. And so there's going to be both finding a job as someone who's been laid off that's in line with expectations, but also attracting people from a hiring perspective. And I think we're going to go through quite a painful few months whilst the news is pretty bleak and everyone's feeling the pinch. There's definitely going to be a bit of a battle in terms of attraction. One thing I'm always concerned about this time of year anyway, it starts to really descend into Christmas. People start to focus on family, and then it's the new year, it kicks off again. But I think the big challenge is going to be, from a candidate point of view, what's stable enough? like what's worth moving for if you're in a stable job, what's worth doing. And from a employer's perspective, it's like, how do you communicate your message effectively? Because you're more likely to you'd rather sit on a sinking ship than jump to one. And I think there's a certain amount where candidates are going to be potentially in a role they're not that happy with, but fundamentally they've been there for 5 or 6 years, they've got tenure, and actually moving to a company unless they can see it's absolutely stable. I've had more candidates in the last couple of weeks ask me about our company's stability than I have so far this year. And it's because this whole, well, what if it does all go wrong? What if we are going to go into a recession? What if that does happen? So I do think it is a bit bleak. I think there's always opportunity, and I think there's always ways to spin things and talk about things that make it a bit easier. But I think fundamentally we're about to go into a bit of a market freeze with people just being quite resistant to moving.
Yeah, it's going to be sort of difficult times, but I think if we all work together, we can get there, can't we? So
absolutely.
But no, that's been brilliant. Well, look, thank you very much for your time, Zoe. It's been some great insights there into the world of talent acquisition. And yeah, I wish you very best of luck in the future.
Thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Duncan.